All right, here we are. We have our Redline rebuild update with our Stovebolt 216. The truck, you can see, is up on the hoist. The clip is on the ground. The head has paint on it, and of course the block and all of our tin work like we just talked about over at the machine shop. So we are now at the point where we can start assembling everything. I need to get this tape off, of course. I have my instructions mainly so I know what my seat heights need to be for the right amount of seat pressure on the valves. And from there, we're gonna get this head assembled today and see where we can get on the block as far as putting the freeze plugs in and camshaft bearings and all that type of stuff. All right, so we went through, I reamed out all the guides. They are all now to size to where the valve stems slide nice and easy, but not too much clearance to where they're sloppy. And now I'm going through and setting my spring height. So the idea is you put everything together. You have the rotator or shim at the bottom, and then you have your micrometer in between the bottom of the spring pocket and then the top retainer. Put your keeper in, pull everything nice and tight, and that gives you a measurement. So this one here in particular, I need to add about 15 thousandths more shim. I'm looking for an installed height of 1 inch 821, give or take about 10 thousandths is appropriate for this particular camshaft and spring setup. Once I know what my shim needs to be, I'll take and add the extra shim. This is a 15 thousandths here. Get this rotator out of the way. Put the shim in, rotator back in. Now it's time for my spring. Now it's time for my spring. Set that on. Put the retainer in, put the spring compressor on, compress the spring down, actually use these little washers or little O-rings, square cut O-rings at the top. They'll actually seal from oil sitting in here and then running right straight down, plus the seals on the stem themselves, umbrellas, and that will stop it from basically seeping, so you get that initial puff after an engine sat for a while. It won't have that initial oil puff, and of course it won't burn oil while it's running. Quick tech tip. Need to put the keepers on the end of the valves just before the retainer. Now, the keepers hold inside this top groove, which is all fine and dandy when they're under pressure. The issue is as you're trying to put these in and you're fighting gravity, they will do exactly this. So what I do is take just some plain old grease. I find grease works better than oil, but put a little or a lot of grease on the end of in that groove. Now you put your keeper in there. And as you can see, the grease gives it enough stiction to hold it in place. Okay. Last valve is in. This head is done. Let's throw it up on some stands. That is our assembled head as far as the valves are concerned. Obviously, we still have to add the shaft rocker assembly, but we will do that once it's on the engine. This does not have any type of extra plug or anything along that lines. This is where there's a big pan that goes over top of this area, which is where the push rods will be at. So again, that won't get done until it's in the vehicle, or I'm sorry, once it's on the motor. And yeah, so we're looking good. Again, the engine is ready to be assembled, but behind the scenes, I've been doing some work on the cab, and mainly just to get it so it's attached to the frame now. The inside was pretty bad as far as this cab corner is completely gone, as far as the mount on both sides was gone. And when you come around in through here, you'll be able to see that I've opted to do All new floor pans in the front, from the seat forward, it was completely gone. Again, we're not trying to make this thing gorgeous, just trying to make it solid enough to drive. Right now, I don't have a crankshaft, so I'm waiting for the crankshaft to get turned. Not a big deal. We have plenty of stuff that we can prep still. I need to take every one of these rings, put them in the bores, make sure that they are of appropriate in gap, and file them if I need to. But I wanted to walk you through this a little bit different than normal. We have a pretty cool shot ready to go, and once we get that rolling, we can't interrupt it. So just to walk through what we're doing, this setup is quite different than what we've used or have had in the past. So the rods, instead of being with the wrist pin and the rod, instead of them being either clipped in as far as the wrist pin, like a floating wrist pin, or the other function has been heated on the small end of the rod and then the wrist pin pressed in, these actually use a bolt and cinch the small end of the rod to the wrist pin. What I notice is there's no real way to, other than eyeball, there's no real setting relative to where the wrist pin's at. So nothing is going to stop me, other than logic, of doing that. So I'm just going to basically center them by hand relative to the bushing and to the piston, just by feel. And then, of course, I'm going to do the same thing relative to the rod because it has its own amount of float. I'll set that in the same spot. At that point, there shouldn't be any issue as far as it coming out and catching the bore. Something else. So if you look really close at these pistons, they are not the normal clean look. These are brand new pistons, but they have been on the shelf for multiple years to the point where they wore out the original box and have been placed into a secondary box. And it's even apparent with the Hastings rings because they came in this box, which is in miraculous shape, but you can see it's been on the shelf for quite some time as well. And pretty cool box. They're wrapped in their individual paper. They're labeled very well. The rings are in excellent shape. Again, these are original rings. These are not reproduction as of this decade. All the directions are on the back. When I talked about ring clearance, so the ring clearance on these are cast rings, and it says allow at least 4 thousandths clearance per each inch of piston diameter. So these are roughly 3.5. So we're at about 14 thousandths in-gap clearance. So I'm going to double check that with a feeler gauge, put them down into each cylinder. Again, like we always do, and then once they are file fit per cylinder, that is where they have to stay, obviously. There's always just a little minute difference between each cylinder, and to be as close as possible, we'll keep them organized and together. Okay, now typically when I'm setting this ring into the bore, I use a squaring tool that locates it parallel to the top surface here to get my measurement on the in-gap. Now you can always use a piston, and this time I am using a piston because the squaring tool is larger in diameter than the bore is. Tell you what, I'm not a huge fan of these oil control rings. These are the original setup, so on and so forth, but they seem a lot tighter than what I'm used to. So I'm going to do some double checking and make sure everything is fine there. So we don't have our crank, as I mentioned, so we're waiting on that, but we're going to get all the sub-assemblies, if you will, done and ready. We're going to throw the cam bearings in the block, and I can't put the cam in quite yet, but I certainly can fit it and make sure everything works right. On this particular block, every one of these cam bearings is different. This is a larger diameter to a smaller diameter relative to the OD of the bearing. and of course the ID as well. But we have a small slot and a large slot and a lead-in chamfer. So lead-in chamfer needs to go this way as we drive it in, and this larger slot has to line up with the cross hole from the crankshaft feeding the camshaft bearing. So a couple things while you're installing camshaft bearings. A, it's got to be in the right journal. B, it needs to be lined up with the feed holes. And then lastly, it needs to be driven in far enough. Well, we got our cam bearings in. Everything went actually very well. I didn't like the fact that I had to drive the front one in without a real good guide, but that bearing actually is a lot longer, so it kind of self-wiggled its way in and aligned. And I had to slightly modify our driver, but nothing crazy. With that, cam bearing's done. I do have a cam plug to put in here, but it looks like I might have to do that off the stand. Next step before this gets all greasy and oily just from general assembly, and like we did on the Model A and a couple other ones that tend to have a lot more sit time than the other motors, I am going to take some Gliptol, which is paint, and coat this area. It's the red stuff, if you will, that you've seen a couple different times. But I'm going to paint this particular area. This is in that pushrod valley and in lifters, and that'll give it some protection. So as you know, the car sits, or this engine sits and not running, as the oil drains off of it, it won't get just a big rust ball in there. Okay, on our 216, this fuel pump was not readily available as a grab it off the shelf, out of the box, and place it on the motor. So unlike most of our builds, I actually need to go through and rebuild the fuel pump. But at the end of the day, they are very simple. And you'll see that this is why it needs to be rebuilt. And if you look back at our engine startup, this is also why I didn't try to use the fuel system, because knowing that it was going to be just nasty. So we're getting rid of these old nasty parts. And I have a brand new rebuild kit. Consists of the diaphragm. As this moves up and down relative to the arm and the camshaft, then that causes the pumping action or siphoning of fuel from the fuel tank and then pushing it up to the carburetor. It has basically two halves, some screws to hold it together. These are one-way check valves that hold that pumping function. And then what I think is kind of cool and unique is it uses this glass globe up on top, and it gives you a visual of the filter. So your fuel filter is really this part underneath here, and you get to see the sediment collect. All right, last item before we are stuck in our progress mode because we don't have a crankshaft is rebuilding the distributor. As far as important things to know when you go to put this back together, you need a light amount of lubrication on all the pivot points and sliding areas, which on the weights is the post, and then this little spot here, I lubricate the plate. Little wheel bearing grease is fine, very little. There is distributor grease that would be better. I just don't happen to have any of that. So the items to replace would be if your springs are bad, as far as the mechanical weights, and then also obviously your points and your condenser and your rotor and your cap. I would highly recommend brand new ones of those. Only cheat on that if you cannot locate them for whatever reason, but they're usually available even on the rarest of items. You're going to want to replace the you know, the roll pin or whatever keeps the gear on. In this case, we had to because of the way it was crimped on from the factory. This is also where, in a performance mind, which this engine is not, you could go through and you could modify your weights and the springs for how to adjust the timing of the mechanical advance. That has some performance advantages. But again, with this particular engine, there isn't, because it doesn't have any advantage to gain. All right, so I'm going to finish assembling this distributor, and then we can forge ahead because we have our crankshaft on the short block. So here's what we're doing. We're going to take the new timing gear. This is the old one. We're going to take the new timing gear that I have in our Oster oven at 450 degrees. And with any luck, that large chunk of steel will expand on the ID and slide nicely onto the end of the crankshaft without any said hammering. There it is. Simple as that. With every one of our rebuilds, we always verify our oil clearances. So specifically here, I'm going to take all the rods, put the bearings in, and then check that ID. And then of course match that to the crank and do the same thing for the main caps. The reason I do that is make sure A, all the parts are actually the parts that I wanted, and B, all the parts are in the boxes that I wanted. So that verifies things. We had that issue on one build where a set of rings were just misboxed, no big deal. Got new rings, but if I would have blindly just assembled them, then that would have been a problem, and likewise with bearings. So here we go. One thing I've noticed with the cast iron pistons, opposed to the aluminum pistons we typically have, these cast iron pistons are really tight. Yeah, really tight. As in, this one is not even the right size. All right, so this piston measures 531, let's call it. 3-inch 531. This piston, attempting to go in the same size hole, measures closer to like 597. Well, we need to find one oddball piston. So, as they say, oh, shizzlesticks, we are stuck. All right, we're back. We now have the correct size piston. It took us a day to get the right one, and now this piston will fit into this hole. So let's get this rod back on, get the rings in, and let's continue the build. Short block is assembled. Crankshaft, cam, all the rods are in. We are over a major hump here. Obviously, we had a little problem with one piston. That is resolved. We're all good on all of our bearing clearances. Our timing stuff is all together. This one's actually quite easy. You just line up your dots. It would have been right here, here, and here. Line those up right around this way. top dead center on number 1. And no chain to mess with, just this fiber gear and then a steel crankshaft gear. This point, I'm gonna put the timing cover on because I have to have, there's 2 bolts that come through this way to hold the timing cover going in this direction. So I can't put my oil pan on until I have the timing cover on. Get my oil pump in. I'll put the fuel pump in as well so you can see where that little arm goes against the camshaft. And that's that. We'll have this bottom end done. Drop the oil pan on, flip her over, and get the head on. Okay, you may have seen us do this in the past. What I'm doing here is I have the head bolts, and of course I cleaned them all up. They were a little bit rusty. Being on the engine, I want them to look nice, but I certainly don't want them gold. This happens to be a manifold dressing. Buy this through Paragon Corvette parts, actually. And it sprays on gold, but then once you heat it, it turns like a dull gray cast color and holds up very well to temperature and corrosion. Now, it's not permanent, it's decent. So anyhow, what I've been doing though, instead of putting the bolts into an oven and cooking them to 400 to 500 degrees, I've been using, since all I care about is the head of the bolt, what I've been using is this mini ductor by Venom here, and it works very well. What this does is as it passes electricity through this coil, inductively it gets ridiculously hot right here. It's fairly warm out here, but all the heat is concentrated relative to the ring of the coils, and then that heats up just the bolt head. Ultimately, this would get it as hot, it'll turn this red hot. Of course, I'm not going that far. I'm only going to the point where it turns the dressing color. You can see it's starting to change color here. Getting a little darker. And it'll eat across. Boom. Get it out of my belly.
Slower.
Yeah, right. Just as torque is very important, the sequence to which you torque your cylinder head to is also important. Basically what you're doing is you're spreading the load out across the surface of the head and the block and squishing the head gasket in the proper, or basically from an in to an out standpoint. It's pretty much a circular pattern, but make sure you find your sequence, check it. Right now I'm just running down these bolts, but I still want to run them down at the pattern. And then I'll go through with the torque wrench and torque them down accordingly. Now, one of the things that we always kind of struggle with a little bit with the time-lapse stuff is the fact that unless the time-lapse sees like major things change, when you're watching it, it looks pretty boring because nothing moves. One of those is setting the valve lash. So as I set valve lash, you know, you're going to rotate the camshaft and the rockers are going to lift and close and that, but it's going to be so slow that you really don't see it. So we're going to do this fairly quick relative to the time-lapse into things. But more importantly, I wanted to explain that setting lash is very important. It's a huge step in completing the motor and getting it set up so it'll A, run right, and B, not have any issues with crashing parts. So what that amounts to is you're taking up all the tolerance between the camshaft, the lifter, the push rod, and then of course the rocker arm, and then likewise, which translates over to the spring, and then of course pushing the valve open and closed relative to the crankshaft timing. So what I'm doing here is this is a mechanical cam, so it does not have hydraulic lifters. I'm not compressing anything. It has no hydraulic pump up. It's a physical solid piece, and of course the push rods are as well, and we like to keep them straight. What you do is based on the specifications relative to the camshaft and manufacturer's spec when this engine was developed, you utilize their numbers so we can set the lash which is measured between the rocker arm and the top of the valve stem. So on the intake valve, we're going to set it at, it calls out for 10 thousandths hot and 20 thousandths hot on the exhaust. I'm going to add 2 thousandths to that for some growth relative to temperature, and that gives us plenty of clearance. So then as it does warm up and that valve lash starts to actually go towards zero, then we don't crash parts and have issues. Okay, so here is our intake and exhaust assembly. Like most cars of the decades, earlier decades, you have this little flapper valve in here, which is an exhaust valve. So as you're on startup, as you're trying to warm up the engine, it actually diverts hot air from the exhaust to the bottom side of the carburetor and the intake charge to warm things up quicker. And then on the flip side, when you get to the carburetor end of things, you have a gasket here that is to isolate the heat from the intake manifold to the carburetor. Seems a little counterintuitive, but the idea is during cold start, you want that flapper valve to open. It warms things up quicker, and then once you're in hot weather, you have this isolator in here that isolates the carburetor fuel in the carburetor from boiling over and getting that vapor lock condition. So kind of twofold. It doesn't work against each other. Initially you're like, well, maybe it does, but it really doesn't. It's two different scenarios. And at the end of the day, for our purposes, and really for anybody that's not going to drive their car in the winter, you lock this into position, which isn't hard because they always rust themselves together, but basically lock it so that flapper valve is closed and not diverting exhaust up to the intake. I find it interesting that at some point in time somebody replaced, or maybe factory did this, but these threaded studs on the end actually are meant to be only a locator. Some of these are smooth. On another head we have, this is actually smooth. So either this was the way the factory did it on the trucks or what have you. You could potentially replace this and put a bolt if you have an issue with leak, but from the factory they did not. And quite honestly, on the trucks, they probably didn't care. All right, so last thing I want to say about this intake and exhaust manifold assembly is you'll notice this gorgeous coating. So both sides are coated in Cerakote from West Michigan Cerakote, and this is a gorgeous black here, satin black, and then this matte gray cast iron-ish look. I like the contrast between the two. Of course, the exhaust is typically black, and then an intake manifold would typically be a lighter color. And we're not trying to match anything from factory, we're just trying to make it look nice. Gives it a good contrast. And most importantly, this coating will hold up for a very long time and will not burn off as soon as we start the engine up. Woo! Got really short on them studs. All right, the Stovebolt is assembled. We have everything from the air cleaner down to the oil pan, fan, all the way to the back of the engine. However, I still need to add the clutch, the bell housing, and of course transmission. But for today, what we're going to do, leave it at that. My engine stands are tied up as far as the test stands are considered. And this actually will take a lot of effort to make the test stands work as quickly as we need to. So we're gonna call the front of this 1950 Chevy the test stand. It has the provision for the front mount. It has a provision for the back mount. So we're gonna slide the beautiful motor into the ugly carcass. I will remove some of these wires out of the way. We're not going to wire it up at this point in time because, as you can see, I don't have the floor plan completely done. However, driver's side is ready. So that's our plan. Take the motor, set it in. We're gonna mock up a radiator in here so we can run it. We need to break in the camshaft like every other flat tappet camshaft motor. And once we have that done, we'll actually pull this out, and then we will finish this beast and get it running and drive it around the parking lot. So the next time you're gonna see this engine is gonna be in the full time-lapse video. So check it out right over here. And it's gonna be making noise. Hopefully none of the bad noises.